Welcome to this new podcast, the International Speech Project Stuttering Support, Episode 1. This is a podcast that is going to focus on stuttering and how to help. A few notes for introduction. My name is Rodney Gabel. I will be hosting and delivering the content for these first podcasts. I am a professor and founding director of the Speech Language Pathology Training Program at Binghamton University in New York State in the United States. The purpose of this project is to deliver content to all people interested in stuttering in different parts of the world in an easy to access format, the podcast. These will be recorded both through video and also in audio, so individuals can access in the easiest way possible. We will be talking about different aspects of stuttering. This first series of episodes will first outline the state of affairs in Africa, and based on a presentation that I did with Dean Lillian at the Joint World Congress on Stuttering and Cluttering in Montreal, Canada. And the entire podcast will be supported and stored on the International Stuttering Association website for access by all of our member organizations and individuals, and also on our YouTube page. And I have a Podbean website that will also house the audio version of these recordings. So the idea is to make this as available as possible and to share the best information. Future podcasts will focus on different aspects of stuttering, research and therapy, cluttering, and then also just personal stories about stuttering. So our discussion today will focus on the state of affairs in African countries. So, in Africa, there is a substantial history of self-help organizations, and these organizations starting locally by people who stutter, and sometimes having professional involvement, but sometimes not. And the reoccurring theme we're going to find throughout this episode is how limited these countries are in professional services, not as a rule in all countries, but in most. But in 2007, Joseph Lukong wrote a bit about the history of self-help in Africa. And he talked about how, and Dina Lillian also shared with me and shared during our presentation, that in South Africa, the South African Speakeasy Association was formed in 1992. And this was a self-help group run for people who stutter by people who stutter. And there were therapists involved in the speakeasy, and these therapists played an integral part. The aim of the speakeasy was to address needs of people who stutter, their families and communities, especially in the rural areas, to those people who stutter who have little or no access to formal therapy or information about stuttering. So similar to self-help groups around the world, the idea was to get information to people who stutter and to offer support. And the vision of the speakeasy was to improve the life of people who stutter and to liberate them from a fear of speaking. In 1998, the speakeasy won a bid and hosted a successful ISA conference in South Africa, having very interesting speakers and important speakers from around the world and from South Africa. People like Susan Block from Australia, Judith Eckert from the United States, Dorvin Breitenfeld also from the United States, and then Leslie Walk from South Africa. And then since then, the speakeasy has been through numerous transitions, and COVID recently has really transformed it into an organization that holds online meetings. And I think what we have found around the world, as all of us have had to do that, is that there's a real benefit from online meetings because the software is easy to use and easy for people from all kinds of locations to access. So, the history of the International Speech Project, Stuttering, is really very much connected to the growth of self-help organizations in African countries. In 2005, Joseph Lukong and others developed the first ever African Stuttering Conference. And this included individuals and delegates from 14 African countries. And the concept that sort of guided the International Stuttering, or like International Speech Project Stuttering, which I am now calling the International Stuttering Project, is basically this concept of Doctors Without Borders, this idea of support and help being done by speech-language pathologists or other specialists who work with people who stutter coming to countries in support. So from the African countries, there were 14 different African countries involved who sent delegates to the International Stuttering, to the African Stuttering Conference. And there were also attendees, primarily specialists and self-help organizers or members of international self-help groups from France, Germany, USA, Australia, India, and the United Kingdom. And these folks came together to support and to help people who stutter. And the International Stuttering Association also supported this conference financially. So this was this idea of people from around the world focusing on the issues of people in Africa, all coming together to discuss issues, support, and to look to starting self-help organizations. And that was really the outcome, is that prior to this conference, there were only 5 countries in Africa that had support groups, but then following this conference, there were 11 countries. There was the Speakeasy, as I talked about already. There was Speak Clear Association in Cameroon, Action Against Stuttering from Burkina Faso, the Stuttering Association in Nigeria, Struggle Against Stuttering in Mali. I'm not even going to try to say the French words, but Benin started an organization. There's a Sudanese Stuttering Association, the Easy Speak Association in Uganda, a group in Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then the Mauritanian Association of People Who Stutter. So the delegates at this African conference indicated that they valued the opportunity to build networks with people who stutter and also with experts within their own countries and from international groups. Then this ongoing development of a supportive network of people with a commitment to improving the situation of people who stutter in Africa was really launched during this meeting. And also, like what was seen as a strength was the idea that experts were sharing information, but also like information and knowledge was deepened because it was a two-way or interactive process between people who stutter and the experts. And this was really when the ISPS, the International Speech Project Stuttering, was launched, and the work that I'm doing and the work we're going to discuss today and hopefully continue as an outcome of this podcast will be related to the start of this International Speech Project. And so there was really this idea of developing self-help groups as a part of this project, which was sponsored by the ISA, and then also speech pathologists providing information to people who stutter and the general public, which again, that's the primary reason I'm launching this podcast, with support from the International Stuttering Association. So there was a second conference in 2008, and this was in Burkina Faso. And in Burkina Faso, there were approximately 230 different delegates from many of the same countries and also from some new countries in Africa. The countries represented were Mali, Nigeria, Senegal, Mauritania, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Chad, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, Kenya, and Cameroon. And again, individuals from Germany, France, the United States, Lithuania, and the United Kingdom. 6 resolutions came from the Congress. First, the continued need for collaboration between African stuttering associations to share information, the creation of a federation of African stuttering associations, and emphasis was laid on the necessity for training of African speech pathologists, advocacy to be made towards African governments in view of recognizing stuttering as a communication disorder, and a wish to continue with African conferences. And then the third African conference was actually planned for in Kenya. Unfortunately, many of these resolutions never materialized, and I think there was good reasons for this. But also, I think one of the real limitations, in my estimation, was that we simply didn't have some of the technologies we have today that would allow for this specialist contact with these African groups and these individuals who need help. And also, at that time, there was a high cost to distributing information that maybe we don't have now. So maybe some of those kinds of things could not have been done. I believe certain countries and certain groups have done better with like advocating and working with government associations. And I think that there have been some connections and formation of larger African stuttering groups and African stuttering association groups. And I will talk about some of those. But this International Speech Project Stuttering did continue development in 2005 and 2008. Again, David Shapiro and Stefan Hoffman were sort of the leaders of this group. David Shapiro was a very well-known specialist and professor in stuttering. And he did do some traveling within this Doctors Without Border model to go to some of these countries, okay, and to deliver therapy and support. Again, very difficult to do that because it's expensive, to travel. And so I think that's why these sorts of things did not continue. I know of anecdotally a lot of colleagues, or at least a few from around the world, who have traveled to various countries in Africa to offer support as a part of the Fulbright program. But again, very hard to sustain because of cost and because of the amount of time that takes. I think now, though, maybe we have some opportunities with technologies to have that contact, maybe without the cost of travel. But there have been multiple outreach programs and have been done throughout African countries, I think, during this time, but also since then. The ISA has shared the Bill of Rights and Responsibilities of people who stutter in therapy, and that's been made available to African countries. There, again, continue to be a growing number of African organizations in their involvement in the International Stuttering Association Conference, the International Fluency World Congresses, and the Joint World Congress, and then also the development and the participation in the Stuttering Awareness Day conferences. And again, there was some travel by therapists to these countries, but not many. But there also has been a development of some universities in certain countries, besides South Africa, which has always had sort of a community of therapists. other countries have developed their own programming and have been able to develop a speech-language pathology profession in their countries also since the advent of some of this involvement. The third African conference really never occurred. There have been efforts. Some of these were derailed because of COVID, but there has been a development of a formation of the Pan-African Stuttering Organization, and there was a meeting of these group leaders, and they developed an online workshop in November 2021, because again, with COVID, it was very difficult to set up an in-person conference. So as a part of this Pan-African Stuttering group, they did develop or reform the African Stuttering Association, and they do want to do a third conference soon. So I want to now take a step back and share information from two studies that looked at the state of affairs for stuttering support and therapy in African countries. Dieudonné, and I apologize, I really struggle saying his last name, so I'm going to go right by him. But Dieudonné runs the African Stuttering Center in Rwanda. And I've worked with him on a couple different one major project and then one follow-up project. But he shared data with me from a study he did, and I don't have the year, but it basically looked at 5 different points related to stuttering support and therapy. First, he wanted to discover the percentage of countries in Africa that have an organization, association, or self-help group for people who stutter. He wanted to discover the number of universities or other institutions training people about treatment of stuttering. He wanted to discover the number of clinics that were available to treat stuttering. He wanted to discover the number of clinicians who treat stuttering in African countries, and he wanted to discover the number of people who stutter receiving therapy during the year studied. I believe this data is from 2014 and 15, but I really am not sure. So what did he find? He was able to get responses from organizations and leaders of stuttering organizations in 11 different countries: Burundi, Rwanda, South Africa, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Chad, Togo, Tanzania, and the Central Africa Republic. At the time of this study, it was estimated that the population across these countries was 232,088,330 people. So approximately 1% of that population, which is kind of the standard incidence number often used for stuttering, what was that? There were 2,320,883 people who stutter in these countries. Only 11 institutions, academic institutions, offered courses on the treatment of stuttering or a training program for speech therapists who would work with people who stutter. It's important to note that 10 of these institutions were in South Africa alone. So again, as I said a few minutes ago, South Africa has a kind of established speech-language pathology, speech-language therapy tradition in that country, and therefore they have therapists. Again, I don't think that from talking with Dina, who is a speech therapist from South Africa, there is still a shortage there, just like I think there's a shortage in specialists or people in speech therapy who do well with people who stutter around the world. But in South Africa, there is that starting point at least, where in other African countries there simply isn't. There were only 16 clinics that provided treatment for stuttering. And again, 11 of these were in South Africa. Approximately 726 people who stutter received therapy during the year that he gathered this data. Between 30 and 55 therapists provided therapy for people who stutter. So think about that. Across these different countries, there was only 30 to 55 therapists. It should be noted a high percentage of these are in South Africa. It's important to note, and I think that this is intriguing for all of us who would like to help, is that in Burkina Faso, 20 people who stutter received therapy from students from France in a program called OrthoFaso. In Rwanda, 6 people who stutter received therapy in conjunction with a program from Florida Atlantic University with Dale Williams and his students called Distance Stuttering Therapy in Rwanda. So my work, again connected with Dieudonné, came in conjunction with his organization, the African Stuttering Center. A little bit about the African Stuttering Center and their focus. The African Stuttering Center is an umbrella organization for people who stutter in Rwanda. They note that there's only 2 speech-language pathologists in Rwanda, in a country of more than 11 million people. There's approximately 110 people who stutter in Africa, in Rwanda. So much of the treatment for stuttering falls with physicians, counselors, and other medical professionals who really have very little training in stuttering. And so there is not a lot of understanding of stuttering amongst the professions who help people who stutter. So a lot of physicians employ medical remedies and surgeries that really do not help. In fact, sometimes they're damaging. Schools in this country are different, or specific. I wouldn't even say different. They were different from schools in the United States. That's not bad, but it was alarming to me, I guess, or just uncomfortable to know that kids who stutter are sometimes, hit or verbally corrected or treated badly related to stuttering. Again, if teachers don't understand, then they have a hard time maybe acting in a way that's helpful to people who stutter. So that's an issue, and I think it's a real problem since there aren't professionals to intervene who really understand stuttering. In the country, most of the societal views still see stuttering as a curse, a result of witchcraft, I think, in more rural areas, but certainly there's a real focus of a psychological disorder. So there's a real stigma related to stuttering. And that stigma leads to all kinds of barriers for people who stutter, and really a high dropout rate amongst children who stutter from school. So one of the impressive things that Dieudonné has done in Rwanda is that he's supplied a lot of reading materials about stuttering to children who stutter, their families, and their teachers in some of the public schools in Rwanda. And then the reading materials and books were from the Stuttering Foundation, and these were donated by the Stuttering Foundation and then were translated from English to Swahili. The hope was that children and families would be empowered by this information as they could access it. Again, they had to get the paper books in the hands of the kids and in the hands of the teachers and the adults who were important, but there was still a real effort to improve this understanding of stuttering. And again, there was some of this material was provided to the healthcare providers who supported the children. Also, this program was reported by both Dieudonné and Dale Williams in 2017. It was the Distance Stuttering Therapy Program in Africa. And this was, again, a partnership between Florida Atlantic. Dale Williams and his students provided therapy to individuals who were being supported by the African Stuttering Center. It's interesting to note that this was initially part of an English communication improvement program that was offered to residents in Rwanda to help make a fast transition from French as their as their national language to English. And again, what came from that is that Dieudonné, worked within that system to sort of bring up the need to support people who stutter. And then Dale Williams was the clinician at Florida Atlantic and the professor who then trained his students to work with individuals. And the first clients were seen in 2014, and it was a positive program, and they were able to offer support. And then they continued to offer this program through Florida Atlantic and then Southeast Missouri State. So how did I get involved? Well, I heard about this really interesting program, and I was doing a lot of teletherapy in my home state related to some stuttering therapy programs that I was running. And I was starting my private practice separate from my university job at that time. And I was like, well, now I can do a lot of different things that I hadn't done before. So in the winter of 2019, after talking with Dale Williams and Judy Custer, who were both partnered on the project with Rwanda to offer therapy, I approached Dieudonné by email and said, how can I help? We started talking about plans to raise money to get a large grant to fund a very large program where I would both do teletherapy to people in Rwanda, but also a training program for professionals who provide support and treatment. So we went through months and months of trying to write grants to foundations and international organizations who could help. I did some more local fundraising through my university and some of those contacts. And then also we did a fundraising event where we had John Gomez present When I Stutter, his wonderful documentary, to the community. And we raised several $100s there. And then also through a GoFundMe program, we raised another $500. And these funds all went to the African Stuttering Center to support them in their facility. So it really wasn't a successful fundraising activity, but a really interesting thing I learned was most of what I wanted to do could be done very, very, very cheaply. You don't have to have the Rolls Royce of technology to deliver a lot of really good content and information to people or therapy. So based on our resources at the time, we decided in 2020 to go ahead and just begin with offering a course to professionals who help people who stutter. And so what we did was we did a training program. The African Stuttering Center in Dieudonné was responsible for promoting and recruiting individuals to attend the training program. I developed the curriculum and the lectures for training. And this was just basic information about stuttering and self-therapy for stuttering. Tried to use Google Classroom, but again, I learned very quickly not a lot of people who were planning to attend had a Gmail account, they had Yahoo accounts, they had other kinds of work email accounts. So what we did was to get over that logistic issue, I started to just use email addresses as a way to manage the course, to send content, to receive content, and to communicate. I also got very used to, and I had been using it for a while, YouTube to record lectures and to record discussion points and contact. And I also, because again, as an American at this time, I didn't use WhatsApp hardly at all, but I found out that many people in the countries we were identifying, especially Rwanda, were very adept at using WhatsApp, and that was sort of the universal platform to share information. So we began the first training with 27 professionals in Rwanda. And of course, this was February 2020. So of course, COVID happened, and that really caused a big strain on everyone's lives involved. I was, of course, probably impacted the least, but I did have a lot of changes going on in my life, including starting a new job and trying to find a house during COVID. So we went ahead and we took a break and we restarted sort of at the end of March. And the content, again, included self-therapy for the stutterer, the 11 edition by Malcolm Fraser. I chose this book because, again, the Stuttering Association makes this book free to users. And then the other thing was also that I thought at the very least someone who has a very cursory knowledge in stuttering but may have experience and knowledge in just how to support people could share this book with their client or with their patient that they're trying to help who stutters, but then also could probably go through the book and work alongside the client to decide these changes and how to do them. So I recorded a number of different lectures from courses I've taught in the past, but then also just recorded content about how to stutter easily, how to the kinds of things that people who stutter run into, and also kind of to answer questions that the participants in the course had shared with me. We did a lot of email communication and asynchronous communication over WhatsApp, and 7 individuals hung with me and completed the course by June 2020. Because of COVID, because of what was going on in everyone's lives, we had lots of stops and starts during that time. Each individual completed a short quiz and received a certificate. Overall, the consensus was that we did set up a very helpful, easy to assess program, again, based on budget and based on a tremendous hurdle caused by the global pandemic. So what the participants did ask for, though, was that they really would have liked more real-time communication with me. They really would have liked the program to have sort of a set schedule, which again was the initial plan, and we couldn't deliver. Dieudonné really wanted to offer it to more people in Africa and different countries. And then we thought it would make good sense to have 2 cohorts, one of support group leaders and people who stutter, and then one with other professionals who were looking to learn more so they could support people who stutter. I reorganized the curriculum and streamlined it, and again made more recorded lectures, added more recorded examples of different kinds of things like speech techniques or easy stuttering versus hard stuttering and how to describe these things. We had over 80 individuals who initially signed up for the program, and we put them into email groups, WhatsApp discussion groups, and that was really it. I didn't employ anything else besides Zoom for visual meetings. And I did hold about 2 1-hour office hours, but I did synchronous meetings throughout the week with people over like WhatsApp or Zoom if they couldn't make the meetings and had specific questions. Of the professionals, most of them were speech-language pathologists this time because there were enough countries that had speech-language pathologists who were involved, and then a fairly large group of support group members and leaders. So it was a 4-week course, again, based around the Fraser texts, and it covered background about stuttering, the nature of stuttering, and ideas for supporting and helping people who stutter. And the course ran from September 5th, 2020 to October 5th, 2020. Things were a little bit better during that time, and people were more ready and able to attend a course. And people completed readings. They discussed the recorded lectures and discussion groups in WhatsApp and with me. And then I did 2 Zoom office hours a week, and then WhatsApp meetings as requested. The first 2 weeks of the program, we looked at the nature of stuttering, what it is, what are the major symptomatology or characteristics shown by people who stutter, what the most likely causes are, trying to get rid of some of those or trying to address some of those not helpful beliefs about stuttering. We talked about percentages of people who stutter, the male versus female differences, those kinds of things. Just basic background and nature of stuttering. And then I talked a little bit about, during weeks 3 and 4, the basics of therapy and support, and being very general, not being too technique-based, but being more, the general idea of stuttering easily versus stuttering hard, the idea of avoiding stuttering and how to work on non-avoidance. And then really dispelling some of the myths about stuttering and some of the medical-like interventions and less common treatments, and how perhaps those aren't directed at this time. And then we did Zoom meetings again from October 5th to November 5th, sort of as an after program. And some of the participants did follow up. Overall, 42 participants finished this second offering of the program, and again completed a short quiz and received a certificate for their training. Again, this program I hope will be built off of and distributed, and part of this ongoing program is the launch of this podcast. And many individuals and organizations shared that they would love to have programs throughout their country and would be open to continued participation. We worked in 2021 to try to set up a program in South Africa, but again, COVID presented a lot of hurdles for people being able to be involved. So I did a study after this program, and this data and the rest of this information was presented at the Joint World Congress for Stuttering and Cluttering in 2022 in Montreal, Canada. So we gathered data from those individuals who either participated in my course with the African Stuttering Center or were on the email list for member organizations in the International Stuttering Association. And we asked questions about the structure of their self-help groups, their access to therapy, and their interest in working with specialists and experts. At the date of this podcast, there have been 18 respondents from the following countries: Lesotho, Nigeria, Tanzania, Ghana, Rwanda, and Zambia, and then 3 participants did not report their country. So what were some of the things that we asked a question about about what takes place in their support group or self-help group. Some conducted a seminar for stuttering awareness. They reported that it challenges him or herself to talk in their daily lives and how they can try to overcome stuttering. Some said that they only did online groups, which would make sense given COVID. Some discussed personal development and how to support each other. They discussed awareness. So basically a lot of the things you would expect, but also sometimes speech-language therapists were involved in their therapy or came as therapists to the self-help groups, and the entire group did group therapy as a part of the self-help group. And again, just the idea of creating awareness, meeting up with other people who stutter, and getting that support to help improve their situation, I think were the basic things that people were reporting. Each self-help group had a different leader or identified person who sort of set up and maintained the organization of the group. Some had a president or a secretary, some had a national president, some had a therapist who led the group. Some had an individual who was a resource person, but there seemed to be a central person who helped run the groups. So what was the availability of self-help groups? Well, most groups ranged between 6 and 10 people, but some people reported on a larger organization of over 30 members. Only 5 of the 18 people reported having therapy. 12 said that there was a significant cost to attending therapy. And basically 14 of the 18 said that it was either extremely difficult or somewhat difficult to find therapists in their country. Of the needs that they reported, or the question was actually stated as, what is the greatest need for people who stutter in your country? Of those reports, things related to just finding treatment was a great need. Also, they really saw a need to help improve acceptance and awareness of stuttering throughout the country. They reported to either like negative portrayal in the media or just a lot of negative treatment of people who stutter in their country. A lot of stigmatization, prejudice related to employment, and just in general, very difficulty. And a lot of the individuals reported just the need for therapists. There's just not therapists in their country who deal with stuttering. Only 6 of the participants said they've ever worked with a specialist therapist or someone who is an expert in stuttering within their groups or just individually. And I asked a question about if you had the opportunity to collaborate with a specialist therapist or expert outside of your country, what mode of communication would work best? 3 individuals said recorded information. 4 said a video conferencing and online modality of interaction would help, and some said and an 8 said a combination of the modalities. So a lot like what we did with the training project we did with the African Stuttering Center and myself. So what would they want from that specialist, therapist, or expert if they were able to interact? Everyone said that there were just a limited number of speech-language therapists, and that what they would want would be support for parents, support for teachers, help with public speaking, speech therapy, bring awareness, just more training experiences, online speech therapies and seminars. So really there seemed to be a lot of interest in things that would be fairly reasonable and realistic to offer. Again, communicating in a virtual way through recorded and through real face-to-face activities over Zoom or other software. So really, in summary, what's the state of affairs in Africa since the development of the program set forth from the IFA? There's a growing number of support organizations and go-to organizations in many of these countries, and they're doing amazing and creative things, and they're really offering support. But they also need help. There's a shortage of clinics, clinicians, and training programs across all of the countries in Africa. Some are doing better than others, but there's a general lack of therapy and resources. The training programs seem to be beneficial, the one that I ran, and it was very helpful. But there, again, it could be done more. But what's great and what we had to do because of the lack of funding and having to do these things on the fly is that there are relatively cheap ways to offer these things. Also, there are efforts by universities and clinicians around the world have been helpful on a smaller scale. So really what could be done is scaling up to really help these individual countries in Africa and individuals who stutter across these countries. I'm hoping to continue these things, and this podcast is a start to it. This is a way to get information out in a way that lots of people can access in different ways. This could maybe help support organizations like the ISA be a hub for information to share with people around the world who stutter and to help them learn more. And we're going to continue to do this and make direct connections, and I welcome anyone who's interested to get involved. So in the future, the next several episodes will be a sharing of some of the information and lectures I shared as a part of the stuttering training I did in 2020. And then we're going to expand on that and bring in other people to present on different aspects of stuttering. And then we're going to expand it further and go into specific topics related to stuttering as listeners request. I really appreciate your time today. This is a long podcast, about 45 minutes. I think most will be shorter, but I really invite you to continue to follow and to be involved in this important project that will hopefully help all listeners understand more about stuttering and start to get creative ways to improve their situation. Thank you again for listening, and I hope that you will find this useful and will attend more of our discussions on stuttering.